The wind howled across the sun-scorched plateau like a chorus of ghosts, carrying the acrid scent of burned sagebrush and the metallic tang of old blood. Elias Brand pressed his face to the cracked earth, feeling its relentless heat bite into his skin, his fingers trembling as they dug into the parched soil. He could taste dust in his throat, and his lips were raw from thirst. Somewhere out there, in the vast emptiness of the wasteland, death waited like a patient predator. Elias had once believed in luck, in skill, in the faint hope that a man could outrun his past. But the desert had a way of proving all illusions false. He had lost his horse to the jagged rocks near a dry creek. His revolver had rusted in the heat, and his body was beaten and sun-scorched from days without proper water or shelter. He had nothing left, not honor, not hope, not even the faintest whisper of a future. Then a flicker on the horizon caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a mirage and illusion spun by the desert to mock the desperate, but the figure moved with a deliberate, confident pace, cutting through the barren expanse like a shadow against the dying sunlight. Elias squinted, struggling to focus, and realized the figure was a woman. She walked without hesitation, carrying herself like she owned the land, her long black hair braided and decorated with small silver trinkets that glinted in the sunlight. Her eyes, dark and penetrating, seemed to see everything. They pierced through him, straight to the core of his regrets, his failures, and the grief he had carried like a sack of stones. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice low but firm, cutting through the howling wind. She stopped a few feet away, and for a moment neither moved. Elias noticed her hands calloused but strong, and the bow strapped across her back, its wood etched with intricate symbols that whispered of traditions older than the canyon itself. "I am dying," Elias rasped. The words came out as a cracked whisper, but he could feel the weight of them. "The desert, it doesn't care who you are." The woman's eyes softened, but only slightly. "The desert cares for the living," she replied. "The dead are easy to forget. I see a man who's still breathing. That is enough." Her words struck something deep inside him, something he had thought long dead. A flicker of hope, small and fragile, sparked in his chest. He swallowed, tasting the grit in his throat. "I don't know if I can keep going." She stepped closer, boots crunching against the cracked ground. "Come with me," she said, holding out her hand not in pity, but in offer. "You will find refuge. But first, you must answer one question. Are you willing to take responsibility for a life not yet born?" Elias froze. Responsibility? A life not yet born? He shook his head, bewildered. He had no family, no ties, no future. How could she expect anything of him? Yet something in her eyes compelled him to nod. He didn't know why. Perhaps it was desperation. Perhaps it was the flicker of possibility she had awoken inside him. The journey to her home was grueling. The canyon walls rose like jagged teeth, cutting off the horizon and channeling the relentless wind into eerie whistles. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. Elias struggled to keep pace, his body weak, his limbs trembling with exhaustion. Yet the presence of the woman beside him gave him an unexpected strength. When they reached the canyon's edge, he gasped. Below stretched a hidden village, carved into the natural curve of the cliffs, with wooden homes and tents clustered around a sparkling river. Smoke drifted lazily from small fires, and the sounds of life children laughing, animals stirring, the rhythmic pounding of tools filled the air. The place seemed alive in a way the desert never allowed, vibrant and safe. "This is my home," she said. "And soon, if you choose, it could be yours too. But first, you must confront what haunts you." That night, Elias sat by a fire outside one of the village dwellings, the flames crackling and sending sparks into the darkening sky. His companion Takoda, He now knew her name sat silently across from him, her expression calm, unreadable. He felt vulnerable in her presence, as if she could see every secret he had tried to bury. "I've done things I'm not proud of," he said at last. The words tumbled out in a rush. The gambling debts, the fights in dusty saloons, the death he had caused when anger got the better of him. Every memory pressed against him like the desert wind, relentless and unyielding. Takoda listened, quiet, patient. She did not flinch, did not judge. Her gaze never left his face. When he had finished, she reached across the fire and placed her hand on his shoulder. Her touch was firm but comforting, grounding him in a way he hadn't felt in years. "You carry regret," she said. "It follows you, yes, but it does not define you. You can leave it here or carry it until it consumes you." Elias stared into the flames. Shadows danced on his face, and he saw them fragments of his past flickering and twisting in the firelight. He realized he had spent years running, hiding from the mistakes he had made. Perhaps the desert had been a test all along, not of his survival, but of his willingness to face himself. The wind howled again, louder this time, as if echoing his thoughts. Somewhere out there, beyond the canyon, the wasteland waited. But for the first time, he did not feel afraid. He had a choice now. He could continue wandering, a ghost of his former life, or he could accept the path Takoda offered, a chance to rebuild, to find purpose, to atone. Over the following days, Elias began to see the village come alive in ways he had never imagined. Women worked skillfully with looms, children ran barefoot along the riverbanks, and hunters returned from the surrounding hills with fresh game. Takoda guided him through the routines of daily life, teaching him how to read the tracks of animals in the sand, how to move silently through brush and canyon, and how to respect the land that had been both enemy and savior. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the jagged cliffs, Takoda led him to a secluded perch overlooking the canyon. "One day," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you may have to defend more than yourself. You may have to protect a life not yet born. Are you ready for that?" Elias's throat tightened. The desert had hardened him, beaten him down, and yet in her words he felt the first stirrings of purpose. He looked at Takoda, and for the first time he saw not just a warrior, but a guide, a protector, and perhaps, if he could survive his own failings, a companion. I don't know," he admitted, voice hoarse, "but I want to try." Takoda's expression softened, just enough to reveal a hint of a smile. "Then you will try," she said. "And that is all anyone can ask. The rest will follow." That night, as Elias lay under a sky littered with stars, he felt a fragile thread of hope take root. The desert had brought him to the edge of death, yet in the hidden canyon of the Apache village, he found the first spark of life he had known in years. But the desert never truly forgives. Somewhere beyond the cliffs, unseen eyes watched, secrets waited, and the shadows of his past lingered, ready to remind him that redemption was earned, not given. And as the firelight flickered across Takoda's strong, unwavering face, Elias realized that the journey to redemption and perhaps love had only just begun. The morning air was crisp as Elias awoke to the low hum of life in the Apache village. Children's laughter echoed across the canyon walls, mingling with the soft rush of the river below. The scent of pine and smoke carried on the wind, a strange comfort after the endless dust and heat of the wasteland. Yet, despite the warmth of the village, Elias felt a knot of unease in his stomach. Peace, he knew, never lasted long in a land like this. Takoda had already left before dawn, moving silently toward the canyon's far rim. Her silhouette was steady and sure, a shadow against the rising sun. Elias dressed quickly, strapping the worn holster around his waist. Even after days of rest, his body still ached with the lingering exhaustion of the desert. But he couldn't ignore the feeling gnawing at him, the sense that his past had found a way to follow him here. It wasn't long before he saw them, 3 riders approaching from the east, dust rising behind them like smoke on the horizon. Horses thundered over the rocks, their riders bent low, eyes fixed on the canyon. Elias's stomach sank. The taller of the 3, with a scar running down his left cheek, was unmistakable. Silas Kincaid, a man whose memory alone could make a man shiver in fear. The one who had haunted Elias for years since that night in the saloon. Elias swallowed hard, his hands trembling despite the leather of his holster. He wanted to flee, to disappear into the canyon's labyrinth. But he knew he couldn't. Takoda would never allow it, and deep down, neither could he. Takoda returned moments later, moving with her usual silent grace. Her eyes met Elias's, sharp and calculating. "They've come for you," she said, her voice low but steady. "And they won't leave the village unharmed." Elias's heart pounded. I thought I could leave it behind," he admitted, voice hoarse. "I thought maybe the desert would let me go." Takoda's gaze hardened. "You cannot outrun your past, Elias. You can only face it. And if you want a future here, you must confront it, or it will destroy everything." The riders drew closer, dust swirling around their boots as they neared the river. Takoda knelt beside Elias, swiftly fitting arrows into her bow. "We can hold them off," she said. "But you must fight. Do you understand?" Elias nodded. His hands shook as he gripped a fallen rifle from a nearby stack. He had never felt so alive, yet so terrified. The first rider spurred forward, Silas at the lead. A cruel smirk etched across his scarred face. "Elias Brand," Silas called, his voice cutting across the canyon like a whip. "Didn't think the desert could spare you. Thought we'd find your corpse out there, but guess not. Guess fate has other plans for you." Elias's fingers tightened on the rifle. He could see the hatred in Silas's eyes, the desire not just for revenge but for humiliation. The other 2 men flanked him, guns drawn, eyes scanning the village for targets. Takoda released the first arrow, and it flew true, striking the horse of the middle rider and sending it stumbling. Chaos erupted as the horses reared and men shouted. Elias fired his rifle, the recoil jarring, but the bullet hit one of the attackers in the shoulder, forcing him to stumble backward. The battle was brutal and fast. Arrows whistled past, dust clouds rose from the stampeding horses, and shouts echoed against the canyon walls. Villagers ran to hide, but some braved the open to help, throwing rocks or brandishing clubs. Elias felt a surge of adrenaline as he moved beside Takoda, her presence a shield and anchor. "Focus," she yelled. "Aim for the horses. Make them scatter." Elias adjusted his stance, breath coming in ragged bursts, and fired again. The chaos worked in their favor, and slowly the attackers began to retreat, regrouping near the canyon's rim. Silas, however, dismounted and charged forward, his pistol raised. Elias met him, hard hammering, and the 2 men circled each other. Silas lunged, and Elias barely managed to dodge, rolling into the dust and drawing his pistol in a swift motion. The 2 exchanged shots, the sharp cracks of gunfire echoing against stone walls. Blood and sweat mixed in the desert heat, a grim reminder that nothing in this land came without cost. Finally, with a well-timed maneuver he hadn't known he could pull off, Elias disarmed Silas, forcing the gun from his hand and pinning him against a boulder. Silas hissed through gritted teeth. "You'll never escape your past," he spat. Elias held him there, chest heaving. "I'm not running anymore," he said. The words were heavy with conviction, more powerful than any bullet. He forced Silas to reveal the truth behind the years of threats and lies, the twisted story of vengeance that had begun in that saloon brawl so many years ago. Silas had blamed Elias for the loss of power and reputation in their mutual circle of gamblers and petty criminals. By the time the dust settled and the attackers retreated beyond the horizon, the village had survived. But Elias felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him like never before. This was no longer about mere survival. This was about protecting something precious, something he had never thought he could belong to, a community, a home, and perhaps even redemption. Takoda approached him quietly, her eyes scanning the area for stragglers. "You did well," she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You faced your past, but this is just the beginning. Your choices now, they determine the lives of many, not just your own." Elias sank to the ground, exhausted. He had expected the relief of survival, but instead, a new weight settled upon him, the knowledge that life in the village meant responsibility. His past had followed him, yes, but now it was no longer a chain around his ankles. It was a lesson, a harsh one, teaching him what it meant to stand and fight for something beyond himself. That night, as the villagers tended to minor injuries and rebuilt the damage, Takoda led Elias to a secluded grove by the river. The moonlight shimmered on the water, casting silver reflections on the trees. "There is more you must understand," she said, her voice calm yet unyielding. "The desert you fled is not the only danger. Outside these cliffs, greed and violence never rest. And even within, trust is earned, not given. You must prepare yourself, Elias, for the life I offer is not easy. It requires courage, skill, and a willingness to face truths you may not want to see." Elias looked at her, the fire of determination slowly kindling within him. "I don't know if I can do it," he admitted. "I've failed so many times before. What makes you think I won't fail again?" Takoda crouched, meeting his eyes with unwavering focus. "Because you are still here. Because you survived the desert, survived yourself. That shows more strength than any gun or bow could. And because the choice is yours, fail or rise. But you will rise, Elias, if you have the courage to take it." The night passed quietly, save for the distant howls of coyotes and the whispering wind through the canyon walls. Elias sat by the river, staring at his reflection in the dark water. For the first time, he did not see a man broken by regret. He saw someone who had been tested and had survived. Someone who could become more than the sum of his past mistakes. In the coming days, Elias began to train under Takoda's guidance. She taught him to read the subtle signs of the land, to track prey silently, to move without leaving a trace. Each lesson was a challenge, each day a test of endurance and patience. Slowly, the villagers began to accept him, not as an outsider, but as someone who had proven himself through courage and action. Yet, even as he learned, Elias could not shake the lingering threat of Silas Kincaid and the men he had sent. The desert beyond the canyon still held dangers, and Elias knew that sooner or later he would have to confront them again. But this time he would not be alone. He had Takoda, the village, and a newfound purpose driving him forward. And as he lay beneath the stars that night, listening to the soft murmurs of the river and the protective watch of Takoda nearby, Elias understood that the life he had once thought lost might not be gone after all. The shadows of his past would not disappear, but he had begun to learn how to walk through them without letting them consume him. For the first time in years, he felt hope. The first light of dawn stretched over the canyon like molten gold, spilling across the wooden homes and tents of the village. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth from the river that curved lazily through the settlement. For a moment, Elias allowed himself a rare pause, a breath of peace. He had survived the desert, faced Silas Kincaid, and protected the village. Yet, a gnawing unease lingered in his chest. He knew the past never stayed buried for long. Takoda was already awake, her silhouette moving through the morning mist with quiet precision. She had long since risen before the sun, hunting or scouting, ensuring that the village remained safe. Elias watched her from the wooden steps of a small dwelling, noting the way her eyes scanned the horizon, every movement deliberate and exact. He had begun to realize that her strength wasn't just physical. It was the discipline, the wisdom, and the instinct honed over a lifetime of survival. "Elias," she called softly, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "Come, there is something you need to see." He approached, curiosity prickling at the edges of his unease. Takoda led him to a ridge overlooking the canyon's edge. The morning sun illuminated the desert beyond, but it wasn't the natural beauty of the wasteland that caught Elias's attention. It was the movement far below. Dust rose from the flat expanse, dark clouds that hinted at an approaching threat. Figures on horseback were charging toward the village, their intent unmistakable. Elias's stomach tightened. Silas Kincaid. He had assumed the man's retreat after their last confrontation meant the threat had passed. But here it was again proof that the past did not forgive. "They're coming for the village," Takoda said quietly, almost regretfully. "And this time, they will not be so easily turned away. We need to prepare." Elias nodded, gripping the worn rifle at his side. "We'll fight," he said, though his voice betrayed the tension coiling in his chest. "I'll fight for this place. For you, for all of it." Takoda's eyes softened for a brief moment. "Good. That resolve will save lives today." The villagers were quickly rallied. Men and women gathered at strategic points along the canyon's edge, armed with rifles, arrows, and makeshift weapons. Children were ushered into hidden alcoves, and Takoda moved among the adults, her presence calm yet commanding. Elias felt the weight of responsibility settle onto him. This was no longer a test of survival. It was a fight for the lives of people who had come to trust him. As the riders drew closer, Elias could see Silas leading the charge. His eyes burned with hatred, a man fueled not only by vengeance but by the bitter sting of pride and greed. The men accompanying him were equally determined, faces twisted in grim focus. They had not come for negotiation. They had come for destruction. Takoda's strategy was swift and precise. She directed the villagers to positions where the terrain would work in their favor. Arrows would fly from concealed alcoves, rifles would cover the approaches, and the narrow passes would funnel the attackers, slowing their advance. Elias followed her instructions, positioning himself with a steady hand, heart hammering with anticipation. The first clash was brutal. Horses reared, hoofs pounding against stone, dust rising in suffocating clouds. Arrows whistled through the air, some finding their marks, others thudding into wood and earth. Elias fired steadily, his hands surprisingly steady despite the chaos, each shot saving a life or buying crucial seconds. Beside him, Takoda moved like a shadow, each arrow loosed with lethal accuracy, her eyes never leaving the advancing riders. The sound of gunfire, the screams of horses, and the shouts of men melded into a terrifying symphony. Elias felt the adrenaline surge, a mix of fear, anger, and determination that sharpened every sense. He ducked behind a boulder, aimed, and fired again, hitting a rider in the shoulder. The man fell, horse and rider collapsing together in a cloud of dust and panic. Through the chaos, Silas remained a constant, moving like a predator through his men, aiming not just to attack, but to strike fear. Elias's mind raced. He could not let Silas reach the heart of the village. Not now. Not after everything he had endured. He spotted an opening, a narrow gorge where Silas would have to pass. "Takoda!" He shouted over the din, Here. If we can funnel him into the pass, we can stop him. Takoda's eyes met his, sharp and approving. Do it, but be ready. He is clever, and he will test you. Elias took a deep breath, moving quickly into position. The riders followed, and the canyon walls funneled them into the trap. He fired carefully, forcing the lead men to halt and stumble. Horses panicked, throwing riders off balance. And then, with a burst of courage he hadn't known he possessed, Elias stepped into the gorge itself, facing Silas directly. You're finished, Silas, Elias said, voice ringing with conviction. This ends now. Silas sneered, leveling his pistol. You think you've changed anything? You're still a coward hiding behind arrows and villagers. Elias didn't flinch. I'm not hiding. I'm fighting for something real. Something worth more than your hatred. The two men circled, tension crackling between them. Silas lunged, but Elias was ready, dodging and returning fire with precise, controlled shots. The struggle was intense, their movements a deadly dance of gunfire and agility. Finally, Elias disarmed Silas with a sharp maneuver, forcing him to the ground against the rocky canyon floor. You can't escape your past, Silas spat, blood trickling from a cut on his cheek. I'm not escaping anymore, Elias said firmly. I'm facing it. With the villagers watching from above, Elias forced Silas to reveal the truth behind years of deception, lies, and threats. The man crumbled under exposure, his bravado fading in the face of accountability. The battle outside the gorge was over. Silas's men had fled, scattering across the desert, leaving their leader broken but alive. Takoda descended the gorge, her movements as graceful and commanding as ever. She surveyed the aftermath, nodding in approval at Elias's courage. You've done more than survive, she said softly. You've protected a community, stood up to your past, and proven your strength. That is the first step toward becoming more than the man you were. Elias sank to his knees, exhaustion washing over him. The battle had left him battered, bloodied, and shaken but alive. And more than that, he had taken the first real step toward redemption. He was no longer a drifting shadow haunted by mistakes. He was a protector, a fighter, someone who could be trusted. That night, as the village tended to injuries and rebuilt the minor damage, Takoda led Elias to a quiet bend of the river. The moonlight danced on the water's surface, and the gentle murmur of the river provided a stark contrast to the chaos of the day. There will be more challenges, Takoda said, her voice calm but serious. The desert does not forgive easily, and men like Silas never truly disappear. But you have shown that you can rise above fear, above regret. That is what matters. Elias looked at her, seeing not just a warrior, but a mentor, a guide, and a figure of unwavering strength. I never thought I could protect anything beyond myself, he admitted. But now I feel like maybe I can. Takoda's eyes softened. You can. And you will. This is only the beginning, Elias. You face the shadow of your past. Next, you will have to learn to protect the future. For the first time in years, Elias felt the possibility of a life beyond regret. He had survived the wasteland, fought the men who hunted him, and earned the trust of the village. And he knew, deep in his heart, that the choices he made now, every decision, every action would shape not just his fate, but the fate of those who had come to rely on him. He sat by the river, listening to the soft rush of water and the distant calls of night creatures, feeling something he hadn't known in a long time, hope. Not fleeting, not fragile, but steady and growing. And as he watched Takoda train quietly nearby, he realized that for the first time he was no longer just surviving. He was living and ready to fight for every moment of it. The desert outside still held dangers, and the shadows of his past would never fully disappear. But Elias Brand had faced the reckoning, and he had emerged stronger, more aware and ready for what lay ahead. With Takoda at his side, he was no longer alone in the wilderness, and together they would face whatever storms the Old West could throw at them. The first rays of dawn cut across the canyon like liquid gold, spilling warmth over the village and painting the wooden rooftops in hues of amber. Birds called softly from the trees, and the river shimmered, reflecting the sky in a serene ribbon of silver. For the first time in weeks, Elias breathed deeply and felt something unfamiliar, a profound sense of belonging. The events of the past weeks weighed heavily on him, Silas Kincaid. The battles, the relentless fear of the desert, but now, for the first time, he sensed that the storm had passed. The village had survived, and he had survived with it. More than that, he had grown into someone capable of protecting and leading, someone capable of love and trust. Takoda approached quietly, her steps soft on the riverbank. Her long braids swung gently behind her, and the silver trinkets caught the sunlight. She carried with her the quiet authority of a warrior, tempered by a warmth that few saw beneath the surface. Elias rose to meet her, feeling the tension of the past battles ease under her steady gaze. "The child is ready," she said, her voice calm but carrying a weight of anticipation. Elias paused, confusion flickering across his features. "Child?" he asked, hesitant. Takoda nodded. "I speak of the future, Elias, the new life that begins with us, our bloodline, the promise of something lasting beyond the desert, beyond regret." He took a step closer, the enormity of her words settling over him like the morning mist. All his past mistakes, all the desert's merciless tests, had led him here to a moment where he could finally begin again, not just surviving, but building a legacy. He felt the heavy weight of responsibility, yet it no longer crushed him. It inspired him. "You're certain about this?" he asked quietly, needing to hear the reassurance aloud. "I am certain," Takoda replied. "And you must be too. The desert may have tried to break you, but it also prepared you. You have learned what it means to face your past, to fight for others, to protect a life greater than yourself. This is the next step." The day passed with the rituals of the fastwolds of the Tiva the Minju the Fatenvinne, with the rituals of the rituals of the rituals of village preparations for a ceremony that honored life, strength, and continuity. Villagers worked together, gathering herbs, arranging stones, and lighting fires that would burn into the night. Children practiced dances and songs that had been passed down through generations, filling the air with music and anticipation. Elias moved among them, helping wherever he could, feeling a deep connection to the people he had only recently known. As evening fell, the sun dipped low behind the cliffs, turning the sky into a tapestry of crimson and violet. Takoda led Elias to the highest ridge overlooking the village. Below, the entire canyon seemed to hold its breath, the river catching the dying light, trees swaying in a gentle wind, the soft hum of life rising in harmony. "This is where we begin anew," Takoda said, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Where?" "Our bloodline will take root, and where we honor the lives we have preserved." Elias felt a lump rise in his throat. He thought of all he had lost: family, home, respect, the life he once knew, and now he realized that loss had not been in vain. It had forged him into someone who could truly appreciate this moment, someone who could give life, protection, and legacy to a future he had once thought impossible. Takoda placed her hand on his, her touch firm and grounding. "Do you understand, Elias? This life, this chance, it is not free of struggle, but it is worth every hardship. We face it together, always." Elias swallowed hard, looking out over the village and the canyon that had become his home. "I understand," he said, voice steady despite the surge of emotion, "and I choose this. I choose to protect, to endure, to live, and to build something that will last." Night fell, and the village lit torches in preparation for the ceremony. Families gathered in a circle around a sacred fire, its flames dancing in rhythm with the songs that filled the air. Takoda led Elias to the center, where the elders waited. They were solemn, their eyes full of respect, acknowledgement, and silent approval. Elias knelt beside Takoda, feeling the heat of the fire against his skin, the vibrations of the chants in his chest. He had never felt more alive. The ceremony was not just about the new life they would bring into the world. It was about honor, redemption, and continuity. It was about acknowledging the past while stepping boldly into the future. One of the elders, an older woman with deep-set eyes and a calm presence, spoke softly, her voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "We honor the courage of those who have faced themselves and emerged stronger. We honor the bond that will bring forth a lineage rooted in wisdom, courage, and respect. Let this night mark the beginning of what endures beyond the desert." Takoda's hand squeezed Elias's. "This is it," she whispered. "No shadows from the past can touch us here. Only what we build together." Elias looked at the fire, at the circle of faces watching him with trust and expectation, and realized something profound. He belonged. Not as a drifter, not as a man haunted by mistakes, but as someone who could protect, nurture, and leave a lasting mark. For the first time, he felt a sense of peace, not because the world was safe, but because he had become a man capable of facing it. The ceremony continued late into the night. Music, chants, and dancing filled the canyon. The children's laughter echoed across the cliffs, and the elders' songs carried stories of endurance and hope. Elias and Takoda stood together at the center, their hands clasped, their eyes reflecting the flames. Each spark seemed to carry away a fragment of past regrets, leaving only determination and promise in its place. As the night deepened, Elias stepped away briefly, moving to the edge of the river. The reflection in the water was no longer just his own. It was a man transformed, a man who had faced death, despair, and relentless hardship, and had emerged ready to embrace life fully. He saw Takoda's reflection beside his own, and the realization struck him. Together they could forge something enduring, a lineage that would carry their strength, wisdom, and courage forward. Returning to the fire, he joined Takoda, feeling the warmth of her presence beside him. They exchanged no words, none were needed. Their hearts spoke in rhythm with the crackling fire, with the laughter of children, with the songs of the elders. As the first light of dawn crept once more over the canyon, Elias understood that the battles of the desert, the hauntings of his past, and the terror of facing Silas Kincaid had all been preparation for this moment. The village had survived, and he had survived. He had proven himself not just to the Apache people, but to himself. Takoda turned to him, eyes shining with quiet pride. "The desert shaped you, Elias, but this canyon, this life, it will define you." He nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle within him. For the first time in decades, he felt truly free, not free from struggle, but free from regret. He had faced it, confronted it, and now, with Takoda by his side, he could step into the future with purpose. The canyon seemed to sigh, a soft breeze, rustling the leaves and carrying with it the faint scent of wildflowers. Elias looked over the village one last time, committing every detail to memory. The homes, the people, the river, the cliffs. This was not just a place. It was home. It was life. It was the future. And as he clasped Takoda's hand and looked into her determined, unwavering eyes, he knew that they were ready. Ready to face whatever trials the Old West could throw at them. Ready to create a new bloodline, a legacy forged from courage, honor, and survival. Ready to live fully, for the first time, together. The desert outside would always whisper its secrets, and the wasteland beyond would always test the unprepared. But Elias and Takoda had endured, and in that endurance, They had found something more than mere survival. They had found hope, belonging, and the promise of a future no shadow could touch. The fire burned low, the first birds of morning called to each other, and the canyon woke to the dawn of a new day. Elias Brand, once a drifter haunted by regret, stood strong beside Takoda. They were no longer defined by what had been lost, but by what they had built together. And in that creation, in that union, the true measure of redemption and life was revealed. The past had been faced. The danger had been overcome. The future awaited. And the bloodline they would bring forth promised a legacy that would endure long after the desert had forgotten the wandering shadow that was once Elias Brand.